Hello, welcome, and happy Global Encryption Day. We're delighted to join you for a conversation on the cross-border cost of weakening encryption. And we have an incredible panel of speakers from across four continents joining us today to discuss the regional threats to encryption and legislation around the world. So, as many of you know, governments are considering measures that would weaken encryption in the name of security in many places. This includes in Canada, bills C2 and C8, European Union's chat control, UK Investigatory Powers Act requests, secret government orders to access data that's encrypted. Now, while often presented as legislation as a way to keep people safe online, it actually weakens security and privacy. It's not really a way that you can prevent crime. It exposes people to more risk, more crime online. So our panelists are all experts in their regional areas in encryption. So we'll go to a lot more in depth and information, and we'll have all these different regional insights for you today. Hopefully we'll have time for a little Q&A, but why don't we jump in and kick off this session of the Internet Society with some opening remarks. So I'll have each of our speakers introduce themselves. And first, I'll turn it over to our president and CEO at the Internet Society, Sally Wentworth, for opening remarks.
Thanks, John, and thank you all for being here today. I want to begin on behalf of the Internet Society in recognizing the power of the Global Encryption Coalition and the value that we place in this community that has risen up and emerged over the last several years as a really powerful force and a powerful voice for online safety and security through encryption. We really value this coalition. We think it's important, and we're really honored to be a part of it. I thought I would begin by speaking a little bit about what's at stake in this debate. All of us who are advocates, get into the individual pieces of legislation and into the details of the technologies, and those are really, really important. And yet it's also important to step back for a moment periodically and remind ourselves what we're doing here. And especially at this moment of tremendous change around the world and a real resurgence of technology through artificial intelligence and massive developments in the digital ecosystem, encryption is a critical solution set for online safety and security. We know in the coalition that encryption protects individual messages, our messages with our friends and family, that we expect to be between our friends and our family, not somebody else looking over our shoulder. We know that encryption is the backbone of online banking transactions. We need to ensure that we can communicate with our banks safely and securely, and that our finances are protected in those institutions. We know that the medical establishment depends upon encryption for online medical records that many of us are using each and every day. Our government services, the way we interact with our governments for a range of services, are increasingly digitalized and dependent upon encryption. So it's important that we get this right. And we need to keep working together to ensure that policymakers understand the role that encryption technologies play in their societies, in their economies, in their national security, and the ways in which they are dependent upon this technology. Weakening encryption makes us less safe. It threatens the personal security of each and every one of us who are interacting online. We know that our institutions, as I just said, depend upon encryption to function safely and securely. Journalists depend upon encryption so that their messages and the ways that they are working are safe and secure, and that they can protect their sources and expose corruption and expose decisions that are needed and that the public has a right to know about. Lawyers need it to protect attorney-client privilege. Businesses need it to protect trade secrets, on and on and on. And I probably don't have to remind this community about that, but it's the institutions, but it's also the people. And so I want to make sure that as we go into this discussion about the individual topics, that we as a community are able to communicate clearly and in plain language what's at stake if we don't get this right. And for us at the Internet Society, we have a goal that everyone can have an internet experience that's safe, secure, and protects them online. And we know that encryption is a key part of that.
Thank you, Sally, so much for kind of bringing that perspective and discussing the community aspect, which is really underlines today's event, Global Encryption Day. Marcel, I want to turn to you next for your opening remarks. As many of you know, Marcel is a former MEP. He's been on the front lines, now Policy and Advocacy Director for Europe and Access Now. Marcel.
Thank you very much for the floor and for the invitation to this panel and for organizing this event on a really important topic. So again, my name is Marcel Kolaya. I work at Access Now as Policy and Advocacy Director for Europe. And indeed, I was a member of the European Parliament from 2019 to 2024, so for 5 years. The mission of Access Now is to defend and extend digital rights of people and communities at risk. And if we speak about encryption, I think it's very clear how it is very close and important for our mission, because encryption protects privacy and security, which is, one of the elements that is often not completely understood, but by policymakers. But I think we'll get into the details of this later. But at some moment, I would say that policymakers have understood that, and also I need to say foreign intelligence and agencies and law enforcement, they understood that pushing on breaking the encryption or weakening it in a way that would be very obvious that this is breaking or weakening the encryption is something that they have, understood. This is not going too far, because even the general public, with the help of civil society, is pushing strongly against something like this for obvious reasons. But I believe that we stand in front of a really dangerous proposition, which is kind of like diverting the conversation from the actual breaking of encryption to something that pretends to be not breaking the encryption or not weakening it, which is called client-side scanning. Again, we will get to the details of it later, but I would just like to make clear that this is actually breaking and weakening encryption, just in different terms. And I think it's really important to have a global encryption coalition, and we're happy to be part of it. Because we also know the approaches of the governments or policymakers get copied from one government to another. So to synchronize on the strategy, how to approach this very dangerous proposition is very important. I have one parallel that I would like to finish my opening statement with, which is client-side scanning is like breaking a seatbelt in a car in a really interesting way, because it's not about weakening the seatbelt. But if you look at encryption as the seatbelt, then client-side scanning basically is not touching the seatbelt per se, but just telling the driver to sit in front of the seatbelt. So the seatbelt is completely secured, but the problem is that the driver and the passengers in the car are not secured. And I think that for this reason, this is extremely dangerous to open areas like this in policymaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcel. Next, I want to turn to Ana Barbara Gomez Pereira. Ana is director at the Internet and Society Reference Institute for Research in Internet and Society. Ana.
Hello, John. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here and for inviting. It's a pleasure to talk with you and for such important topic that is very important for us at IRIS. As you said, I'm director of the Institute for Research on Internet and Society, and we are an independent and interdisciplinary research center. We just completed 10 years this month, and we are dedicated to produce and communicate scientific knowledge about internet and society topics, as well as defending and promoting public policies that advance human rights in the digital matters. And in the topic of encryption, we have worked in this topic since a few years. First, in an effort to communicate and to democratize the arguments about why we should defend and stand up for strong encryption. And we did a course that is available on YouTube called Cryptography and Society, Technique, Regulation, and Practice that was supported by ISOC. And it was a very important point for us to communicate with experts in our country in a very clear way about how it's not something just technical, but it's about defending human rights on internet, about defending privacy and security, and as you were saying, to avoid people to be more exposed to crimes online. And after all, what we wanted to communicate is privacy is security, and they are not something that can be, we don't need to choose between privacy and security. We want to have both because we want a secure digital environment. So we have to communicate the importance of encryption for all. And most recently, we did a research about the protection of children and adolescents in environments with encryption in Mercosur. And we worked to understand how this topic is being discussed in Global South, especially in South America. And we also contributed with this agenda here in Brazil. I will talk a little about this later, but we just approved a bill to talk about childhood defense in digital environment. And the topic about privacy and security is very central, as we all can imagine. And encryption in this topic, it's also a way to defend vulnerable populations as children and adolescents. So it's my first words, and I'm looking forward to keep talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ana. Thank you so much. Next, for opening remarks, I'll turn to Tamir Israel. Tamir is director of the Privacy and Surveillance Technology Program at the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. Tamir, thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much for having me. I think I'm going to echo what my colleagues have said, which is, yes, of course, encryption is critical. And because it does have this technical element to it, it has been hard over the years to communicate to the public, what encryption does. And I think it's our job in civil society and through coalitions like this one to keep doing that over and over again whenever the latest attacks on encryption come. For our part, we've always tried to provide a more detailed explanation of the ways in which encryption is integral to realizing a whole range of human rights and a whole range of functions that are critical to any functioning democracy in ways that people can understand a bit clearer, as well as, speaking to the other point, which is, encryption is also critical for cybersecurity, as well as public safety even, right? And I think it's a testament to, this coalition and many of the groups here that in many jurisdictions, at least, there's at least now some level of recognition by even some governments that encryption is important. But then we get into these debates that my colleagues are mentioning about, so what is undermining encryption? So I think it's a little it underscores the need for us to be really diligent and continue to communicate this, because it is very technical, and every new attack of encryption takes a slightly, tangential form where the government is saying, well, this doesn't undermine, all the encryption, or does it, or it does it in ways that are, less problematic. But I think it's incumbent of us to continue to underscore this point and explain it in ways that are understandable to the public, that encryption needs to be as robust as it can possibly be if we're going to, provide any meaningful measure of security in digital spaces. So in Canada, I know we'll get to this in more detail, but in Canada, we've seen iterations of this over the years, and right now we have at least two bills in our House that have some that we're concerned are going to be used to undermine encryption, even though they have some facial, some level of safeguards for encryption that are not going to be enough. But that's just so that the government can say, well, we're not undermining all encryption, but we in practice they will be making it more difficult for the most robust encryption to be put in place in the way that needs to be if we are going to have a secure ecosystem.
Thank you, Tamir. Now, we do have one additional panelist who we're hoping can still join us today. That is Nashilongo Gervasius from Namibia University Science and Technology. It seems like we might be having connectivity problems, which is why we still need to connect everyone to the internet. But let me join or move on to our next question for this group, which is, keeping this high level, this concern that attacks against encryption are often put in a way that is based on this idea that encryption is actually harmful to online safety issues. How do each of you explain that encryption is actually part of the solution, an important part of the solution for security and for privacy? And let's start in reverse order with Tamir for this.
Yeah, it's tricky because every time you get a new every time there's a new something happens that is encouraging a new wave of surveillance powers. Encryption is there's often a new attempt to paint encryption as part of the problem, and we've had this going dark. Public safety agencies have been going dark for, I think, like 3 decades now, and been complaining about it. Yet somehow in our approach to this has been twofold in the past. So on the one hand, again, we've really made the effort to try to explain what encryption does in terms of protecting fundamental human rights and in terms of public safety on the one hand, and again, you can't really have you can't have journalists, you can't, without robust encryption, doing their job in a way that's secure. You can't have, they need to be able to talk to sources. We've had in Canada situations where police, were going after sources of stories that were trying to expose public safety debacles, and with more secure encryption, that would have been more difficult. We try to bring in these examples in ways that explain to people like more directly what encryption can do and why it needs to remain robust. We've also, on the other hand, like continue to underscore this point where like there is this going dark story that we keep hearing from people who are advancing the need for more inroads to encrypted data as a way of making sure that public safety gets all the data that they need. The flip side to this story is that that you don't necessarily hear as frequently from public safety officials is that there is really just more data out there than ever before, and law enforcement and other agencies are actually their ability to have a very complete picture of what we're doing in our lives is more robust than it's ever been. So yes, encryption is protecting some data for sure, and it's critical that it continues to do so. But the overall, like this idea that it's critically impeding public safety on the one side, rather than actually facilitating public safety and cybersecurity by providing robust safeguards for communications, is not really is one that needs to be, I think, confronted at every turn. So that's how we've gone about it.
Thank you, Tamir. We're delighted to have Nashilongo Gervasius, who was just able to join us. So I want to turn to her next. We just went through brief introductions and discussion. The question for you, if you can introduce yourself and kind of where you come at this from this issue, and a discussion on how you explain to people that encryption is actually part of the solution, not part of the problem. Nashilongo, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, John, and thank you to the Internet Society for organizing this very important conversation. I think you have done a lot in introducing myself, but I work for the university as a researcher and also with administrative responsibility. Perhaps I would just start with a general observation of how encryption look like for many of the African countries, and this is based on some of the project work that we have been doing. Really also setting that within the context that the African region, being one of the continents with low connectivity rates to the internet, has been making inroads in making sure that there is digital transformation is taking place. Increasingly, government has started to digitize a lot of services. We're seeing investment by both the public sector, but also private sector in e-governance and general connectivity. And so this is, to a certain extent, very commendable. But we're also seeing that encryption is increasingly being used and integrated in laws that are supposedly to serving and the protection of human rights, from ensuring privacy or against data protection, where we're seeing more and more of surveillance and data access points being created by states under the banner of national security and cybercrime prevention. So we're seeing many of those proposals for laws that could compel, to a large extent, service providers to weaken encryption and providing backdoor access to user data without users' knowledge. So that obviously weakens the trust, right? It undermines trust and it exposes users to greater cyber vulnerabilities. But that's not all, right? There's so many other conflated issues that are related to encryption, not only just laws that are supposedly protecting people, but being used to undermine public trust. As so increasingly lack of awareness, and this is where universities like ours obviously come into play, making sure that our curriculums answers to those needs, but also lack of technical capacities, but also the general issues of digital literacy that is even made challenging by issues of digital divide. And so while I think my colleagues who have spoken before me have engaged on issues of how encryption would be necessary, for instance, in the protection of children and other vulnerable members of community, such as human rights defenders, amongst others. We're seeing that the state, to a large extent, is using the same laws to oppress people. And really, again, that is within the context of just how democratic processes look like within the African continent. That democracy is obviously very interpreted differently, and there's the need for the state to know what people are thinking, what people are talking, is mostly what is leading to this. And so I think there's a colleague who gave that example of, making sure that there's a belt, and on the other hand is that the belt is not being used, right, by the driver and the passengers. And so that really speaks to the issues of, to the context of undermining, the values and the need for encryption within a world that is increasingly being digital, but also the need for protecting of journalists, need for protection of children, the need for protection of human rights defenders in general. Yeah. Thank you, John. Let me end here and really just come back that there's a need to promote human rights-centered approach in digital governance in general. And for that to take place, the policy-making processes and the adoption processes for policies related to technology needs to be as transparent as possible, but also that these lawmaking processes must take place in rooms where they are individuals, skills, people who understand the human rights context related to technology. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nashilongo. Next on this question of how we explain that encryption is necessary, not a trade-off with privacy, I want to turn to Anna. If you can talk about how you explain that to people, the importance of encryption.
That's the big question. Well, at IRIS, we see this challenge as a both way to work on it. First, we have the same digital literacy problem, the digital gap, and the challenge of make people understand the importance of encryption, of cryptography, and that is not that if you have nothing to write, is not reason enough to believe that you don't need cryptography. We need to understand and to talk about how it maintains bank security systems, air traffic control systems, and many other sectors that rely on encryption to offer a secure service. And in this topic about working with people to use better the internet and safely, a safer internet, we have some strategies to talk about this in a more democratic way, and ways to to make the technical issues seems more tangible and more simple to people that are dealing with it day after day, but they are not realizing it because it's too technical. So there is this part of the work, and another part is to talk with policymakers and make them understand that encryption is a way to ensure that internet will be safe, inclusive for them, inclusive for journalists, inclusive for policy, and everyone else that is working in sensitive topics. It's important to national security. It's important to national sovereignty, and many other topics. And we need to remind them that we live in a space, in a world that is already massively surveilled by government, by corporations, by many strong forces that are dealing with our data in many times not in a very trustful way. So we need to have this kind of tool to protect ourselves and protect each other from abuse. And our research with authorities has shown that generally proposals to break encryption are a demand for investigative shortcuts. We have many other problems that make harder to investigate crimes in Brazil, for example, but it's much more easier to say that if you break encryption, the problem is solved. And we don't have any evidence that this sentence is true. So we have to work with policymakers and with authorities to clarify what is the problem and what is the challenge, and why we should not see the backdoors and cryptography, the backdoors, sorry, as a shortcut for investigations, for example. So it's more or less the two paths that we have to seek to raise this awareness about the importance of encryption.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think those are great points on, what are you actually trying to solve? Will this help you solve it? Right. I mean, it's such an important part of this. Marcel, I'm sure you never had to explain that to your fellow members of parliament, right? Everyone understands the importance of encryption there. What were those conversations like? What kind of arguments did you raise that really resonated for people that made them understand the importance of encryption?
Thanks. So how much time do I have? 4 hours? Or yeah. So basically, I think when it comes to how to explain, as many times it already has been said by other speakers, that this is not like a tiny issue that we're discussing, weakening encryption, but it's super important, is to frame the debate correctly, because I think many of these misconceptions come from the fact that the debate is incorrectly framed. So I would start with, well, I have just a couple of examples so that also we fit in the time that we have here, but I would start with strong, saying that strong encryption is essential for security and protects national security, because many times one of the objectives, and maybe we will dive into that later when we speak about the regional priorities for policy making in this area, is to protect security, to protect national security. But encryption is a mathematical process and it cannot be selectively applied, and therefore any demand for a backdoor that only works for the government is essentially at war with math. Now, second, given law enforcement exceptional access threatens human rights and democracy, encryption is critical to democratic governance and the protection of right to privacy and the right to freedom of expression in the digital age. and therefore weakening encryption through exceptional access mechanisms jeopardizes these basic human rights and democracy as a whole, as explained, in the previous point. It cannot easily be done to just give some sort of an exceptional access because we're speaking about math, and therefore it jeopardizes the system as a whole. Also, connected with the first point, encryption actually strengthens not only privacy, but also security. So framing the debate on encryption policy as privacy versus security basically is absolutely inaccurate and premised on a false binary, because these are two mutually reinforcing principles. So a more appropriate framing of the debate would be, this is security versus security. So encryption not only protects privacy, but it also protects security, which means that if you want to achieve security by weakening encryption, you're actually decreasing security, and this needs to be taken into account. My last example is saying that backdoors to encrypted systems will not actually stop criminals and terrorists from using strong encryption. Because again, one of the reasons that we often hear justification to weaken encryption is we need to stop the criminals, we need to stop the terrorists. These are major threats to the society. But the problem is that by definition, criminals and terrorists don't care about legislation. So mandating backdoored systems or backdoors to encryption does not mean that these individuals and organizations would use these systems with the backdoor. And maybe a bit kind of like a bonus is I find it really interesting that the narrative now is the law enforcement is kind of like going dark. We're in the dark ages of everything hidden and encrypted. But as a matter of fact, as also put by one of the previous speakers in different words, is that we are actually living in golden age of surveillance. There's a lot of surveillance everywhere around us. So building the narrative as law enforcement is really in the dark, I think is absolutely inaccurate. And my last point is when speaking to policymakers in general, I think it's good not to dismiss the objectives, because many of them are have very well intended objectives that they want indeed more security. So basically, like, dismissing the objectives they want to achieve is not going to help. I think we just need to help them understand that inherently by what they are proposing, weakening encryption in this case, does not actually lead to protecting these objectives or achieving these objectives, but rather to the opposite, to actually leading to less secure society, or less security in the society.
Thank you, Marcel. Next, I'm going to turn to Sally. Sally, I know this is something that we've talked about, kind of personal for you. Can you talk about, how you explain the importance of encryption and its meaning both professionally and personally for you?
Absolutely. And there's so much that's been said that I resonate with, so I might pick up on a few of those points. I want to pick up a little bit where Marcel left off, which is recognizing, especially, public policy officials, for the most part, are trying to act in the public interest. And trying to meet them there, to say, concerns about national security are real. Concerns about protecting public safety are real. we all share a collective goal of protecting children online. So we aren't against those things. And sometimes I worry that as a community, we can be put on the opposite, on the wrong side of that debate, when that's not what we're about at all. So I think there is something really important about meeting them in those public interest concerns, right? Being able, I think, as Anna said, to make the language and the terminology more tangible. I think that was the word you used, Anna. I think that's really important. And it's a little bit of what I think the Global Encryption Coalition is trying to do this week with some of the messaging with the parrot, and trying to make this, we're all humans, and the government officials are also humans, getting people to understand in really tangible terms what encryption delivers in their daily lives. And then that will help them, I think, extend that into the public space as they try to craft laws and regulations. Understanding the importance of encryption for protecting their own passwords or how they interact online individually will help them understand what this means for the collective. Marcel, you also made an important point about framing the discussion and not, I think, accepting the framing that it's privacy versus security, that it's we have to compromise one. We should not accept that framing, and we need to reframe it. And there's different ways to do that. And I liked what I was hearing today. I think Callum, has said this is a false trade-off between privacy and security. And we know, as the examples have borne out today, that there are examples where governments have tried this, a little bit of a backdoor here, and we've seen the repercussions of that. And we need to talk about those examples. Salt Typhoon in the United States is a classic example of that, right? National security of the United States has been compromised as a result of weakening encryption in this case, and trying to provide exceptional access. So leveraging those examples for others, I think, is really quite important. And then I think as a community, there's real value in this community sharing those stories, sharing, hey, this argument was successful. I was able to craft this narrative, this approach that was successful with this group of policymakers, and sharing that with others, I think, is incredibly valuable. And that's where I've seen this coalition really bear fruit, is supporting each other as we're trying to confront the myriad of policy threats to encryption around the world. No one organization can do that alone. And we're learning constantly, right, in our interactions. And as the narrative changes, we have to change with it and be adaptable. So I really do think that coalitions like this one are a way to help frame the narrative, provide the tangible impacts and narrative that we need, show how this really protects people, and then demonstrate when governments have compromised it, the repercussions that has had. I think that's also really important.
Yeah, thank you, Sally. Thank you, everyone, for those really insightful answers. We heard a lot on human rights. We heard a lot on how people don't even realize when they're using strong encryption, because luckily it's part of kind of the bone of the internet that we don't even see, but it's so important for everything from financing, and every healthcare, every part of the internet, the security versus security argument, and that there are problems, right, that we're trying to solve, but it's how do you do that in a way that's actually going to reducing security. So thank you all for those really insightful answers. I want to move to one more round of questions, and I'll start with Nashilongo. And the question is, from your regional perspective, right? A lot of African countries are still in the digital transformation. They're still, developing cybersecurity strategies. What are the main threats or maybe opportunities for encryption that you see?
Yes, thank you, John, again, for letting me be back on the screen and really engage. So what we are finding from the African region, and that provides an opportunity for perhaps creating greater awareness in terms of making this very technical words and sort of engagement, as Sally was saying, very relatable to people, is amongst others, is making sure that the rooms in which policies are made, policies are passed, have people that are understanding digital rights at this point. I'm saying this because much of the conversations that we're seeing, particularly with policymakers, the understanding or the approaches towards technology has been that very linear approach, that technology is an end to a mean without really considering all the other aspects, such as privacy, as we've mentioned, and the issues of security. So there's a need that those rooms, I think, really, if there's anything, I think that is the best intervention that there could be, is making sure that we sensitize as many policymakers, but also making sure that we strengthen other national frameworks of engagement on technology policies, and making sure that the policies, when they are being developed, when they are being passed, they are very sound and they prioritize humanity or people first. And of course, we know about the Internet Governance forums that is obviously have taken sort of root or taken presence within the African continent. I think that has always provided an opportunity for all different stakeholders to be engaging sort of on an equal footing on what policies should look like and should mean to all the players. I'm not too sure, but I think a couple of the colleagues that were in this room were just in Windhoek a couple of weeks ago for the Forum for Internet Freedom for Africa that took place for the first time in Namibia. Of course, this is a forum that has been taking place on the continent and a couple of other countries. And so assemblies like that, or engagement spaces like that, should be increasingly supported, because they come off as at most also very neutral for policymakers to understand what they're working with, what the laws that they are busy building would look like for everyday people. Because again, you've got so many people congregating in one space, but also sharing very different perspectives on what matters looks like. So for instance, the Internet Society had this encryption workshop here in Windhoek, and it was very interesting to really understand from the journalists, from lawyers, from academics, from civil society leaders who were in that room, and really just try and engage on what this, again, very technical subject look like, or what it is supposedly is, and what it is being used for, in a way also creating trade-offs for what it is meant to be. So again, maybe coming back to really sum this up, is to say, if there's anything, the policymaking processes could be our entrance. That's also because maybe I enjoy policy work, but also really digital literacy, making sure that the everyday citizens are educated and understand what privacy but also security look like in an increasingly digital world. So maybe policy first, but there's so many other things, right? You've got skills, if I've mentioned it, and capacity issues. But again, I think for the African continent, that has always been a challenge to achieve in a place that people are just, battling to prioritize issues of access to water and electricity that could be also seen as priority by many of the government. I would say that I'm not too sure in terms of the cybersecurity laws within the African continent. The last time I think there were lesser than, I think, 36 within the African continent in general. Data protection, that is also the same. And I mean, now with the increasing processes towards making policies or ensuring that passing policies of AI, that's even lower, right? So there's perhaps a battle in ensuring priorities with digitalization, as I've mentioned it, but also the challenge everyday issues of bread and butter for the African continent. But I agree that the balance must be sort of achieved, and the balance must put citizens and people first, despite what states would want to prioritize at the expense of human rights. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nashilongo. Tamir, I'm going to turn to you next. I know we're coming up on time and there's a lot going on in Canada. If you can kind of talk about what you're working on, what you're seeing and focused on in Canada right now.
Yeah, I'll do a brief overview, but we basically had two legislative proposals that have threatened to undermine encryption. One of them came against this backdrop of we've had a bit of a trade war with the US, which is our #1 trading partner normally in normal times. And there were a lot of bilateral threats. And there was also a lot of pressure to adopt new surveillance powers from the US. And we got a legislative proposal that was intended to respond to these threats by adopting these new powers. And a big element of it was one of these technical capacity bills that would allow the government to compel various digital services to re-engineer the way their services operate to facilitate surveillance, which is a very clear threat to encryption, as we've seen in many jurisdictions around the world. One of the ways that we push back against this bill, and it does look like it's on hold right now, is by emphasizing that one of the objectives of this bill is to strengthen, at least it's presented as an objective to strengthen our borders in response to, concerns voiced by the United States, that there are weaknesses in our surveillance and border integrity framework. And we push back on that, with this very clear, statement that, by undermining cybersecurity, by creating a regime that allows for encryption to be undermined and undermining cybersecurity, you're doing the opposite of that. You're actually, opening us up to foreign adversaries. And then also, though, because of this tension with the US, there is also a resurgent sort of impetus from our government, from people in Canada, to make sure that our data and our infrastructure is a little bit more less dependent on our neighbor to the south. So, and again, encryption is reminding the government that encryption is one of the most robust and powerful ways of ensuring the security of data, was something that helped us, I think, respond to this initiative, because it had all these threads, these policy threads, intertwined in the way that it was, in the objectives that that were presented by the government as backing it. The other bill that we had, and I'm going through these quickly, was actually a cybersecurity bill that posed a threat to encryption. And again, that one's still going through the motions in Parliament. But what we've really emphasized is that it makes no sense to have a cybersecurity bill that there's a good chance, and we've seen other jurisdictions, could be used to undermine encryption and undermine cybersecurity. You're basically at odds with your own objective. And there has always been a tension between, doing cybersecurity through more surveillance. But we've really underscored that, you have to draw a line at robust encryption, and that if you put that on the chopping block, you're going to get less cybersecurity. By pointing to examples, I think many have been, we have the Salt Typhoon example in the US that Sally mentioned, and then examples also over the years, like every iteration of this attempt to do, to weaken encryption in ways that allow surveillance, but then are presented as also providing a measure of security, have all, not one of them, I think, has really lived up to its promises. So we've been emphasizing all those and just really kind of explaining to the government and to the public that any room for weakening encryption is going to undermine the objectives of these bills.
Thank you so much, Tamir. You covered a lot in a short amount of time with so much going on. Anna, I'm going to turn to you next. You've already mentioned some of what's going on in Brazil. So if you can talk a little bit more about that, and if there's something that gives you hope in that we can go in the right direction in Brazil.
Yes, sure. Well, you have always a lot going on, and in Brazil is the same. We have already several bills that were trying to break encryption, and the importance of having a strong civil society prepared to make this debate, it's very crucial to arrive at this point with the context that we have today. And Brazil just approved a law to protect children and adolescents at digital space. And one question that we have right now is how to do the age verification in a safe way without having a lot of sensitive data being collected without necessity. And we are trying to discuss and to argue that encryption can help to make this tool a safe tool and to make an example to the world how to do age verification without collecting a lot of data, sensitive data. And just this week, the coalition, Digital Rights Coalition in Brazil, that is an organization with more than 15 institutions that works on digital rights, just wrote a note, a technical note, to ask for the policymakers and that are doing a public hearing, but it's writing. I don't know how to say that in English. But they are asking for solutions and about the age verification. And one of the things that we are arguing is that encryption can be a tool to do it without make identification, make the age verification without identify the person that's using the person that's using the tool, the digital tool. So yes, it's public consultation. Thank you, Paul. And well, that's one point that we think that Brazil could help the environment, to look forward for the next challenge, because we are moving to a point where everything is so complex with AI, with digitalization of the life of the children's and the government and everything. So we must to be awake to defend and to protect digital rights on this environment. And we are sure that encryption is one of the strongest tool that we have. And we publicized a fact sheet with research that we did about information security and protection of children and adolescents discourse and regulatory proposals in Mercosur, with Brazil, Venezuela, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. and we listed which are the normative tools to protect children online and how encryption is being framed in this debate. So it's something that could be useful for other contexts and could put everyone in some page to discuss how we can look for the more vulnerable people online and try to understand the needs and the ways that we have to protect them. So I think it's our next steps is to deal with this and how to ensure that whatever it is the solution about age verification is something safe and that protects privacy and security online.
Thank you, Anna. I know we're already over time, but Marcel, I want to make sure we give you the chance to talk about so much in the EU, but to talk about the EU conversation and kind of what's at stake right now.
Thank you. Well, in addition to already long existing debate on chat control, which is sorry, what we call a legislation that aims at protecting children online. There is a much broader cybersecurity strategy or internal security strategy that I would like to talk about, which is called Protect EU, which is a European internal security strategy that has a lot of objectives. Just to name a few: strengthen security capabilities, protect against serious and organized crime and terrorism. So you can imagine, what the objective for an internal security strategy can be. What is interesting from our perspective as advocates for strong encryption is a roadmap for effective and lawful access to data for law enforcement, which is part of that internal security strategy or a roadmap that was drafted as a consequence of going in this direction with the security strategy. And that focuses on 6 key areas: data retention, lawful interception, digital forensics, decryption, standardization, and AI solutions for law enforcement. So again, from our perspective, the most interesting is decryption now. And on decryption, the Commission promised to deliver a technology roadmap next year on encryption. So technology roadmap on encryption to identify and to evaluate solutions that enable lawful access to encrypted data by law enforcement while safeguarding cybersecurity and fundamental rights. So basically now in the actual definition of that technology roadmap and the intended objective, you already see that inherent contradiction on how this is put. If you take into account what I said in my first intervention, safeguarding cybersecurity and fundamental rights basically means enhancing encryption and not weakening it. The issues that I can see is, while trying not to repeat too much what I said before, is that weakening encryption is detrimental to fundamental rights enshrined in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, particularly the protection of personal data and freedom of expression and information. Given that there is no technical lawful access to end-to-end encrypted communication without breaking privacy and security, this indicates that we should not go in that direction. And I just remind that client-side scanning breaks privacy and security. So that is definitely not a solution. Other, potential impact that that can be foreseen is a risk of disproportionate surveillance and lack of judicial oversight, which we can see also in other areas where there are attempts for different technological solutions that are detrimental to fundamental rights. And also, if anything like weakening encryption enrolls, then companies can choose either avoiding Europe or implementing weaker security standards, which both of it would lead to innovation slowdown. Interestingly enough, innovation is one of the key, innovation in Europe is one of the key objectives of the European Commission. And I would also highlight a potential research funding shift. So instead of funding research on strengthening security, we can expect more funding on access to encrypted data. And also, this would lead to a danger jeopardizing free and open source software solutions, which I think are key for achieving European sovereignty, another key objective of the European Commission, because achieving something like client-side scanning in free and open source software may become some sort of like a roadblock in achieving this objective, and then can basically lead to endangering free and open source software. And again, I think if the Commission wants to achieve more technological sovereignty, then free and open source software is not something that we should avoid, but it's rather something that the Commission should encourage to adopt and build on. For the sake of time, I stop here.
Thank you all so much. Thank you to our panelists. It's been so insightful. I know we're already over time. Sally recorded a very special message with US Senator Ron Wyden for our Global Encryption Coalition community. So let's turn to that. And just once again, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to all of you who tuned in. And thank you very much to my colleague, Natalie Campbell, who helped organize this panel. So let's turn on the video message.
He was one of the first members of Congress to see the opportunity of the internet. And in his many years of public service, he has been a relentless advocate for an open internet that supports free expression and innovation.
To me, internet policy is everything. It is health policy, it's labor policy, it's trade policy, it's criminal justice policy. What I've always said is that the internet is about the little guy, the person who's powerless, who doesn't have clout.
So a lot of legislation, and we see this happening all over the globe, a lot of legislation that threatens encryption is often proposed in the name of protecting children. I am a mother of two, and I am deeply aware of the challenges that parents like me face as we try to help our children navigate safely online.
If you weaken encryption, it is an enormous gift to the predators and the horrible people who want to stalk and spy on children.
What's really important is that encryption is actually part of that package. It is not the problem, it is part of the package of solutions that we need to make available.
Ben Franklin said anybody who gives up their liberty to have security really doesn't deserve either. And these are not mutually exclusive. We can protect our kids and we can prosecute people who are putting them at risk. Every single day for decades now, you have been standing up for internet freedom and making sure, for example, that we always have strong encryption because we want a safe internet. We don't want one that's fundamentally unsafe.
If you could give us a rallying cry, what would it be?
Get loud. To me, the words that are important here is protect encryption.
Thank you once again. I'm really glad that we were able to show that special video. I know we went a bit over time, but thanks again and a round of applause to our panelists today. and we'll turn on to our next Global Encryption Day Summit session.